Just a quick note ahead of tonight's episode. I know that we are here to discuss a seminal film, particularly the Oscar-winning film for Robert Redford, and I just have to let you know that we recorded this in advance of the news today that he had passed away at age 89. Unfortunately, he will not be included in this week's In Memoriam since we usually record a week in advance, and I think we do a good job of memorializing him at his probably peak triumph of time in the industry. I know that most people recognize him for most of his acting roles, and his work as a director was a little bit scarce as far as some of the films that are remembered. This is the one that I would say people pull out as the number one film if he had a directorial film that they either remember. It's either this or probably Quiz Show. But that being said, a towering figure, a Hollywood icon, a significant figure in independent film, as well as in his political leanings and what he did for philanthropy as well. There's a lot you could say about Robert Redford, and we will next week when we memorialize him in our regular segment for In Memoriam. But just to let everyone know that in advance, we did not have a chance to know or discuss his passing in this episode, but we hope you enjoy it nonetheless. This podcast may contain explicit language. We would have been all right if there hadn't been any mess. But you can't handle mess. Ordinary People is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And tonight, for our 279th episode, we discuss Ordinary People, the Best Picture winner of 1980, celebrating its 45th anniversary. Directed by Robert Redford, written by Alvin Sargent, cinematography by John Bailey, music by Marvin Hamlisch, starring Donald Sutherland as Calvin Jarrett, Mary Tyler Moore as Beth Jarrett, Judd Hirsch as Tyrone C. Berger, Timothy Hutton as Conrad Jarrett, Elizabeth McGovern as Janine Pratt, M. Emmett Walsh as Salin. That seems like such an odd name for all these like lily white names, Anglo-Saxon suburban names that we have here. And he's white, but okay. Dinah Manoff as Karen Aldrich and Frederick Lane as Joe Lazenby. Background for the movie. Based on the book of the same name, Ordinary People was released on September 19th, 1980. The film was a box office success, grossing $54.8 million in the United States and Canada and approximately $36 million overseas for a worldwide gross of $90 million and finishing number 11 at the worldwide box office for 1980. The film drew rave critical reviews and was eventually nominated for 6 Oscars, Best Actress for Mary Tyler Moore and Supporting Actor for Judd Hirsch, while winning eventually Best Picture, Director for Robert Redford, Adapted Screenplay for Alvin Sargent, and Supporting Actor for Timothy Hutton. It currently holds an 89% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, an 86 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Now, of course, as we normally do each week, we can't discuss this film solely by ourselves. Not that we're not capable, but it's just a better rounded discussion when we bring in some opposing views. And so we bring back tonight for this discussion our returning celebrity guest, host of Reels of Cinema and Movies Across the Pod, making his now 3rd appearance on the show to date. Please welcome back Frank Mandosa. What's up, Frank?
How you guys doing? Thank you so much for inviting me back. I always enjoy our conversations. You just have a knack for making your guests feel right at home and welcome. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the compliment there. How have you been the last couple of weeks since our Sunset Boulevard revisit?
I'm not gonna lie, nothing has been bad, but it's just been a rocky couple of weeks. I'm just
Oh,
coming back now, 2 days ago, from Scotland. We flew out midweek last week to move my daughter into the University of Edinburgh. So between the jet lag and then the emotional roller coaster of saying goodbye to your kid who goes to college, let alone who goes to college internationally, that's pretty much been the definition of of the past 7 days for me. But getting used to a new school year and meeting my new students, it's been great.
Are you an empty nester then, or do you still have anybody at home?
Well, as Dinah Manoff, an actress in Ordinary People, the title of her sitcom from the late 80s, the Golden Girls spinoff, Empty Nest, we are empty nesters now. My son is 2 years older than my daughter, so he's entering his third year of school. He also is in Scotland. He's at St. Andrews, though. He's at a different university, but both my kids are in Scotland. So it's empty nesting to the nth degree as far as I am emotionally. It's all good stuff, though.
Dad, what was your, I guess, feeling the minute that you became technically an empty nester? Although I know you've, since that point ever happened, my grandparents, your in-laws, have been living with you the whole time. So I don't know, have you really ever had an empty nest?
we have about 4 or 5 months while they're down in Texas or where they used to be doing their projects. That's about it. Yeah, 13 years and counting. It's wonderful.
Okay.
That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Especially in a public forum.
Yes.
So we turn our attentions to some other family drama tonight with Ordinary People. Now, I think this film has a reputation for being a little bit controversial from the standpoint that there are a lot of people who love the film Raging Bull. And this is one of those that I think gets unfairly punished for winning over what a lot of people view as the superior film. We have Shakespeare in Love, which I don't think is a bad film. It's just not as good as, in my opinion at least, as Saving Private Ryan. But it unfairly gets punished because it's in the shadow of what most people feel is a superior film. I think we have the same thing when it comes to The Social Network and The King's Speech, or some people's feelings on a very controversial Oscar win at the time, I suppose. And your mileage may vary on which of the two films you love more, but Moonlight and La La Land might have that issue for people. So we'll dig in here, and I think part of it is that I know we're going to be discussing Raging Bull later on in the fall/winter this season yet. So we'll have that conversation on the superior film more or less, especially because I have not seen Raging Bull in quite a while. And I don't think my dad has seen it in probably decades at this point. If
I just watched it 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
Oh.
okay. But before then, had it been decades?
I hadn't seen it since 1981 when it was on HBO.
So yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
But regardless, I guess these two films are going to be linked together. It's very much in the same vein as our last conversation on All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard, where you have two competing narratives for what is the superior film in a very close race. I want to start, though, discussing this film singularly before we get into a larger conversation, maybe on the film itself. And I think the good place to start here is, especially in an era now where I feel like the generation below me, even though I'm lumped in as all the younger kids now are still somehow millennials to all the boomers like my dad. And so everybody basically from 40 down to 10 is somehow lumped together in one generation as like those damn kids. I do think, though, there is an appreciation for this generation in being cognizant more of mental health, in vulnerability, in pain. And I think a lot of what this film is dealing with are those things. So up until this point, and I can't obviously speak to what the context was like in 1980 nearly as well as either of you, who I think were growing up at the time that this movie came out. But why do you think your generation had such a hard time with pain, vulnerability, mental health?
Well, I can only speak from my own personal experiences. I was 6 years old when this movie came out. I was born in 74. So obviously I didn't see it at that point in time. I didn't see it until years later. As far as, well, first of all, I'm Generation X.
Okay.
Through and through. And with that said, things like counseling and psychiatry, I think that my generation was really I think we were the bridge. And this is, again, just my own personal perspective. I think that my parents' generation, who were, ironically, they were the love generation. So you would think that they would be in touch with their feelings because they were always, during the counterculture movement, talking about finding inner peace and finding a spiritual connection with the world. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities, but my parents' generation, at least those of my parents' generation that I personally knew, I think that they felt threatened by the idea of anybody talking to a psychiatrist or simply a counselor. I think that for a lot of people it was a sign of weakness. I think that for a lot of people they were afraid that, how can I word this, parents would be blamed. In other words, they always blame the mother or they always blame the father whenever someone goes to see someone for help, and they try to get at the root of the problem. And I think a lot of it was, for some people, just not really much trust in the field of psychology, at least not yet. It was still coming into its own in terms of being a field that was seen as a reliable source of mental health services. A lot of it was, you'll be fine, just smile, grin, and bear it. So I think that was my parents' generation. My generation, I think, was the bridge, because by the time I was in college in the mid 90s, I think things were changing a little bit at that point in time. And I can say that there were still some who were resistant to that change. Ordinary People came out in 1980, a time when I think it was very much ahead of its time. I think it was very much ahead of its time because the character of Conrad Jarrett, this was something that was not addressed really in films. Now, what I mean by that is, I remember perfectly well that we had One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I remember that we had The Snake Pit with Olivia de Havilland. I remember those films, but this was adolescence. This was a kid. This was a kid who was in high school. This was a kid who came from a home that was very cold. I really cannot think of a film, a mainstream film at least, that dealt with these kinds of issues where the parents were not seen as the beacons of hope, the saviors, the ones who were doing their best to get their troubled child through a very difficult experience. Because, or at least the character of Beth, because Beth is not depicted as the kind of mother who is capable of giving that kind of love and guidance, I don't know how ready audiences were to accept that yet. And let alone from Mary Tyler Moore, who was America's TV sweetheart with Dick Van Dyke Show and her own show. And she was always the vivacious, toothsome character, the perky, especially in Dick Van Dyke, the happy homemaker. And on Mary Tyler Moore, she was the inspirational single woman who was determined to make it on her own. This for her was a very different kind of role. And we'll get into this when we talk about the characters, but as far as mental health is concerned and how various perceptions of it have evolved, I think that we are in a better place, thankfully. I think that there is more of an awareness. I think there is more of a willingness to deal with it. I think that for many people, it is exactly what they needed.
So I think this movie, and before I let my dad jump in here, does some very important things that were probably very novel at the time. One is the parent role, or almost gender reversal, where the father is the much more emotionally healthy, in touch with his feelings, and allowing himself to grieve parent in this situation. Normally, the Mary Tyler Moore character is usually the father been depicted up till this point, and even well after this point as well. Whereas the mother is usually depicted in the way that Donald Sutherland is playing this. But additionally, I think it also tried to take the guild off of affluence a little bit. I think we have a problem sometimes in seeing people who have either wealth or status or affluence as, well, their money must be enough for them. They should be happy. Why aren't they happy? Well, there's more to being a human being than having your baser needs supplied for. And I think anybody can have problems too.
I'm going to talk about it basically in the whole context, which is, I mean, there was a strong mentality. We had a bunch of veterans coming back from World War II. I mean, we had George Patton slapping soldiers who were suffering from PTSD from the battlefield because he said it was weakness. And men, especially coming back from the World War II and even from Korea, buried those feelings and caused a lot of rage, a lot of alcoholism, and it was never addressed. And it was something that took place and was kind of hidden and not discussed, and it was a quiet thing that you kept private. In 1972, Thomas Eagleton was a senator from Missouri who was nominated for vice president with George McGovern. And then it came out that he had been hospitalized for depression and had undergone electroshock therapy. And that destroyed his political career because no one could see how anybody who could be a leader, if need be, one heartbeat away from the presidency, if they are having electric shock therapy. But I think it started to change a bit as the decade ended and it became more obvious that we started having issues. And I know for a fact that when I was in high school, it never dawned on me how really fairly well liked I was. I had a lot of friends, I had a lot of people that knew me and such. Some people liked me, some people didn't, whatever. I was kind of a polarizing figure. But going off to college, I had some adjustment issues because I was in a world completely isolated and where no one knew me, and I was having a hard time connecting. And I ended up in counseling because I was trying to figure out what I was trying to be or why I was having difficulty. And so that was common. We had counselors on campus that were starting to do this very thing, helping people along. And it got more and more common as the decade of the 90s took place. And I think it, evolved. We had some very high profile cases of depression that came about, like Mike Wallace had talked extensively about his bouts of depression and some other celebrities and such. But, I mean, we're going back to the fact that when I was in high school, one of our teachers drove 90 miles an hour into a bridge embankment or bridge abutment to kill himself. And the remedy is we'll have a moment of silence in the school. And that was all what was done. And he was a well-liked, well-thought-of teacher who apparently was suffering from very bad bouts of depression and killed himself. And that was the remedy. And this is like 1979. So it changed dramatically. And I think, and I will get to this when we're talking about legacy, if you just Google the movie Ordinary People and what impact it had on mental health treatment in the United States, I think I counted over 100 articles that have been written, some as late as 2023, where they're going back and tracing this. So I think this movie had a huge impact on American society and emphasizing what can happen and how mental health can be addressed by counseling and treatment.
So, Dad, what is your relationship to the film?
I'm trying to remember, and I'm just not, if I saw it in theater or if I saw it shortly after when it went on HBO. In 1980, I would have had a driver's license, so it's altogether possible that I did go and see this in theaters. I was a big Taxi fan, so it wouldn't surprise me if I went just because Judd Hirsch was in it. Obviously, a much different role than his role in Taxi, but still, it wouldn't surprise me. But I can't be 100% certain.
I know that I watched this, I think, approximately in the last 12 or so years, but I can't place my finger exactly on when. I think I've seen it since then and now for this time. So I want to say this is my third time viewing it. There are parts of it that I think are extraordinary, and this is very much a moments film. I know when we get to scenes that we're supposed to be like picking out this whole minutes long scene, but this movie to me is in its small moments very powerful, but as a whole, I still think it's an imperfect film. It's got a lot of, not ironically, mess to it. There's some pieces of it to me that don't fit together quite right. It's not a perfected version of this. And I actually think that makes it a little bit more powerful is that it's people on the outside of the mental health, I guess, revolution, as it were, trying to understand and grapple with their own turmoil, their own grief, and all the things that are going to be wrapped into this. I know that all three of the primary actors in this family were all dealing with their own emotional traumas at the time that this was made. And whether they said that they used that for fuel for what they were working on during the film, it's still, I think, it has to impact you in some way as you're making this. So for me, I've always been astounded by it. I think there's a little bit more nuance I saw this time around to grading it a little bit more on a curve, but I still think it's a very powerful film. Frank, what's your relationship?
I can tell you exactly the first time that I saw this movie. It was the summer of 1996. I had just graduated from college, and as I watched it, I was completely emotionally invested in it. I promptly went out and bought the book, and I read the book, and then I reread it. And it became a, strangely enough, a favorite of mine for a while. I began to seek out and watch other films that Timothy Hutton was in because I was so drawn in by him in this film. And that's how I found out that in the years since, he has had a steady but overall an unremarkable career in the years since. So I began following him as a result of this film. Then a number of years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I began teaching high school English, and I've actually taught the book a decent number of times. As a result, I can now probably recite passages from the book verbatim. I won't, but I probably could do that. I will say that the book offers us a little bit more or a lot more of the background of some of the characters, particularly Calvin. And I had students who really responded to this film. I had a few students who were troubled by it, and we don't teach it anymore, which I think is a good thing because I think that feelings about suicide have certainly evolved in the years since. Previously, suicide was thought to be an act of selfishness. It was thought to be something that you only did if you were quote unquote crazy. And I think that understandings of the depths of despair that some people go through, that some people sink to, I think that there is more empathy about that now. Like, for example, the phrase commit suicide, there is a growing movement, and I know this through my career, through what I do. There is a growing movement to change the wording to died by suicide as opposed to committing suicide because of the implication of the word commit, meaning that it is a conscious decision that you sit down and deliberate, and it's different for everybody, I'm sure. I'm sure it's different for everybody, but I think that the attempt to replace the phrase commit with the phrase die by suicide is intended to be an act of a gesture of an acknowledgement, I should say, an acknowledgement of the fact that sometimes for some people, it is an impulsive decision that is made in a moment of complete and total hopelessness. Like I said, we don't teach the book anymore, but I have read the book and taught the book a decent number of times over a period of probably 13 or 14 years.
I think there's a lot of nuance to this question, but I'll raise it with you, Dad, first. Do you think we're actually in a better place right now with mental health than we were?
We are, but
I know
it's
like I
difficult.
said, there's
It's difficult to say. I mean, how much better? It's almost as if we've gone to the other extreme where we're popping pills like crazy, etc. But by the same token, we don't have enough mental health services. We don't have enough insurance covering mental health. We seem to have some sort of, and it's not just mental health. We have problems with our with our healthcare system all across the board. But this is just one area where it's really been a big problem. I mean, it was to the point where you could not get medical care because it was a pre-existing condition until the pre-existing conditions requirements were put into place. And then ultimately, when the ACA was adopted and they changed the rules on it. So it's still a big problem. But I think we're better attuned and people are better empathetically, towards the conditions and have better understanding. I don't think we're better off with the treatment we're getting because it's so limited and it is very urbanized. So if you happen to live in a larger urban center, you have better access to mental health care. If you're in a rural setting, good luck.
Well, that's just healthcare, period. And that's only going to get worse here as we cut back on Medicaid funding and some other things that, whether your politics is one way or the other, obviously we've made it no stranger on this show how liberal we both lean. But regardless, I think that we are in a better place of awareness. I know that we have all of these, mental health awareness month and whatever. I don't think we need to be more necessarily aware of mental health. Frankly, my generation and the one behind me is acutely aware of almost any mental health issue they may or may not have. And frankly, I think we see an overabundance of people overemphasizing their supposed mental health challenges at times. This is where I'm going to take a slightly more conservative talking point. I think there is an epidemic of people over analyzing themselves, self-diagnosing, and then getting treatment that they probably shouldn't from either their healthcare provider, who is not an actual mental health trained provider. It's usually their primary care provider in the form of pills. And thus why we have this epidemic of like people on mental health drugs that probably shouldn't be. Now, whether or not you want to take your stand on Make America Healthy Again and the SSRIs and all that other conversation, that we can save for a completely separate time. But I think we are in a better place, at least recognizing and understanding severe mental health problems. But I also think we don't have enough funding. We definitely don't have enough providers just anywhere. I mean, yes, you can get more care if you're affluent. So like the availability to somebody like Conrad Jarrett is higher, but I still think there are nuanced pieces where we've moved forward, but we've also moved backward in some capacity.
Part of the problem is that we've come into this false assumption that depression or mental health is tied to your socioeconomic standing. That somehow if you're poor and downtrodden, you're going to be more inclined to be depressed. And if you're, affluent, you're going to be less inclined. And I can tell you that's not the case. I mean, I admit I have had significant bouts of depression, but it's genetic. My dad did, my grandfather did, and you'd have to understand and treat it. I mean, I readily point out to people if anybody asks, and I don't hide this fact, but I have a good life. I've been very blessed in having a good home and stable family and everything socioeconomically that I could imagine, and everything's been great. But yet still, what I tell people is that some days, if you ever had a cut on the bridge of your nose and you had to put a bandage on it, that's some days what depression is like. It's no matter what you do, you can see that or feel it in front of you. And it takes some both admission that you have the problem and desire to get help and treatment for it in order to alleviate it.
What is the film actually about? We've touched on a lot of the things that happen roughly around the film or happening in the film, but what do you think the film itself is about?
I personally see the film as being about trauma, how people react to trauma. Conrad Jarrett is initially resistant to the idea of calling Dr. Berger. It is his father who says to him, call him today. I think that we should stick to the plan. You've been out of the hospital for several weeks, for a month, and you need to go. Conrad is resistant. He obediently does go. And once he arrives, he's apprehensive at first. Dr. Berger is unconventional, but eventually it becomes, for him, something that he almost looks forward to, his sessions with Dr. Berger. It's a safe place for him. It's a place where he's able to try to learn a little bit more about himself. Then you have the character of Beth, Conrad's mother. She is completely against the idea of psychiatry in general. When they're at the birthday party for their friend, and Calvin is talking with another lady, and she's asking, how's Conrad doing? And Calvin mentions, well, he's seeing a doctor a couple of times a week. And then you have that close-up shot of Beth. She hears this, she turns around, and she has that disturbed, angry look on her face. And then when they are driving, she goes over to him. Oh, you've been drinking too much. She's putting on appearances. But then the drive home, she says to him, I don't think that psychiatry is the kind of thing that people hear very easily. And I go back and forth. Was she being protective of Conrad in saying, keep it private, don't give him this stigma of seeing a psychiatrist? Or was she concerned about the image of the family, that she is struggling against all reality, this image that she is trying to maintain? We can take care of our own. She says to Calvin, I am me. This is my family. We will deal with this in our own way. She refuses to join him to see somebody themselves. She says, if you need it, then you go. I'm not going.
So I know my dad is rip roaring to go for his commentary on this, and I think he and I very much agree. People like this, and I see her as somebody, especially with the confrontation later on in the movie, where can't you see anything from anyone else's perspective, where they have that argument on the golf course? She says, no, nobody can. Obviously, I disagree with that entire notion, because that's what empathy is. I mean, come on. But that being said, she's only seeing it from her perspective, and she's potentially feeling embarrassed that she's allowing a certain ding in her social status to her friends. You don't present that there's ever anything wrong. And that's basically how I always read that scene. But I would assume Dad agrees.
What I'm going to say is this is about two psychological diagnoses. One is post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically survivor's guilt. And the other is a narcissistic complex. Mary Tyler Moore is the classic narcissist. Everything pertains to how she is perceived among her group of friends, the adoration they exhibit towards her, and anything that detracts from that is a slap at her moral fiber, her essence, her being. And so she cannot stomach it. Everything has to do, from her having to have cleanliness and clean up and having everything spotless, because it will reflect poorly on her if it's not. And that's all she can see, is how all of this ultimately impacts and makes her look lesser.
And I think you see that a lot through how emotionally manipulative she is anytime somebody like questions her point of view or her worldview and tries to knock her off her pedestal in admitting some level of vulnerability or whatever else. Because it's really neither here nor there that there's problems within the family. She can talk about wanting to have this behind closed doors or dealing with it in a private matter, but she doesn't want to deal with it at all. And that's just her excuse to try and just shelve it, is we have to deal with this in private. No, it's you just don't want to deal with it at all, and you just want to sweep it under the rug because you're not emotionally healthy enough to deal with all of the grief and the grieving and whatever else is in. However, in this most recent viewing, I will say, and for the first couple of times that I watched it, I felt her as somewhat of the antagonist in this film, because she's against the two primary characters we're meant to really follow and root for, that are somewhat the audience avatar, that we get a lot of scenes from their perspective. And my understanding of the book is that it's mostly switching back and forth between Conrad and Kelvin's perspectives. So I think she's perceived as this antagonist, but I think I had a lot more empathy for that character than I ever have on this particular viewing, to the point where I don't see her as an antagonist or a villain or whatever else. I see her as the most tragic of them, because the other two are trying to make strides and deal with their grief and work through this process that they have to have. And she's just so emotionally stunted.
Well, and part of this is, how to put this exactly,
Como se dice?
It's a limitation on her ability to actually, when she's and they talk about this, when things are clean and there's no problems and nothing gets messy, they're fine, because the family can function with her cold, self-centered personality. But when there's trouble and they have to rely on each other and they have to draw emotional support from each other, she's absent. And as a result, that's what ultimately tears the family apart, is her inability to reach out and to meet the needs of the two other members of the family that have survived, because she understands that she can't do this. And it's so uncomfortable, she would rather run away than try to deal with it.
So, Dad, before we get much further, do you have a plot summary ready for us?
Yes. Ordinary People is a powerful drama about a family torn apart by loss. The Jarretts seem like a perfect upper-class family, but the death of their oldest son, Buck, leaves deep scars. Conrad, the younger son, Timothy Hutton, struggles with guilt and depression, leading to a suicide attempt. With the help of psychiatrist Dr. Berger, Judd Hirsch, he slowly begins to face his painful emotions and heal. Conrad's father, Kelvin, Donald Sutherland, wants to connect and support him, but his mother, Beth, Mary Tyler Moore, cannot show her feelings and insists on keeping up appearances. This emotional distance pushes Conrad away, creating tension in her and Kelvin's marriage. Ultimately, the family must confront the truth that love and healing require honesty, not denial.
Thank you, Dad. Did you know Gene Hackman was originally cast as Kelvin Jarrett, but then later dropped out when he and the studio could not come to a financial agreement? I did also see somewhere that he was also considered for Dr. Berger, and I think
Donald Sutherland was originally going to be Dr. Berger, and then he shifted over when Gene Hackman dropped out.
Okay. I mean, I've seen some different casting in both of those, but it would be a different movie. Honestly, I mean, Gene Hackman could probably have done as good a job as anybody it's just hard to see, especially with how good of characters we got in this, anybody else, but I don't think that Gene Hackman would have been a lesser performance. It's just a different performance.
I have a hard time believing Gene Hackman could have given the depth of vulnerability that Donald Sutherland did.
You're probably right, because he played mostly hard asses through most of his career, but who's to say that he didn't have that in him? I mean, you kind of get a little bit of that with the Royal Tenenbaums, which I know you haven't seen yet, but there's some vulnerability in that. Also, a then unknown Michael J. Fox, who had just moved to LA to pursue an acting career, auditioned for the role of Conrad Jarrett, but reportedly did not impress Robert Redford, who flossed his teeth during Fox's audition. Natalie Wood was also considered for the role of Beth. I gotta admit, I like Robert Redford as an actor or in his roles, but the more I hear about him, the more he seems kind of like very self-involved.
Well, yeah, if you were as big a movie star as he was and looked like him, yeah, you could be rather self-involved.
Yeah. Okay. Did you know Elizabeth McGovern, not McGovern, Dad, was a student at Juilliard during filming? The school permitted her to do the film on the condition that she leave for Chicago each Friday night and return on Sunday, filming only on Saturdays. It was the first time Juilliard had ever permitted a student to make a film during a school term. I don't really know that much about Juilliard, but
I just know that they had roommates, and Christopher Reeve and Robin Williams were roommates when they were at Juilliard. Stuff like that.
yeah. I mean, I know that Robin Williams was close with a lot of people. There are a lot of rumors to certain people that I think I've heard like 5 different people be mentioned as his best friend at one time or another. All right. Did you know director Robert Redford and screenwriter Alvin Sargent were faithful to Judith Guest's novel, particularly in their handling of the character Beth? Guest was deliberately vague as to Beth's approach and management of grief, and this was achieved by shuttling the book's chapters back and forth between the viewpoints of Calvin and Conrad. No chapters are seen through Beth's eyes. The character exists only as she is seen by others, which emphasizes her increasingly ambiguous emotions and motives. In this way, Guest was able to drive home the point of her book, that no two people grieve in the same way, and that families divide because they cannot recognize each other's grieving mechanisms.
Well, speaking of Robert Redford and his relationship to the characters and to the book, I do know from Mary Tyler Moore's autobiography, she says that it is the character of Beth who drew Redford to the project, because the character of Beth reminded Redford of his own father. And he really wanted to get at the root of what is it that is preventing you from opening up. There was a deleted scene where Redford had Mary Tyler Moore, having just baked a cake, simply open the fridge, take it out, and look at it. No dialogue. She's the only one there. No other characters there. And the direction he kept giving her was always the same. Just look at the cake you made. That's all he said to her. So she had a different thought with each take. Would it taste as good as it looked? Are the strawberries on the top, are they perfectly lined up? She had a different thought each time. And eventually he said, no, clear your mind, try again. And he just could not get from Mary Tyler Moore what he was trying to get. And she says in her autobiography, all these years later, looking back, I realize now that really what he was going for was trying to understand what was in this woman's soul. And he just still could not locate it. And that he was probably looking to find some kind of connection with her in that moment and having her hold a cake. But it didn't work out, and the scene was left on the cutting room floor.
Did you know? Author Judith Guest shared her feelings about the character Beth in an op-ed about the making of the movie. At one point, I confided to Robert Redford my many frustrations with the character of Beth, the mother. I don't see her as a villain, I said, but people seem to hate her. I have a lot of sympathy for her, and yet I wasn't able to get that across. Some characters are like poems. You never finish them, you just abandon them in despair. He told me, I see how you as the author might feel that, but for me and for the purpose of this movie, I think she works just fine. So I quit worrying about her. So again, somebody not intended to necessarily be the villain or the antagonist here.
I don't see her as a villain per se. I see her as a narcissist, and I certainly see her as just digging the hole, the emotional hole that they are all in, just digging it deeper, because she does not make any attempts to try to see anything from anybody else's perspective. Getting back to what you were saying about that scene at the golf course, she is unable to trust.
All right, finally, did you know? Judith Guest's novel, Ordinary People, is on the list of the most banned books in school libraries. With a scene depicting two teens losing their virginity, frank discussion of suicide, and graphic language, it remains very controversial in schools. In fact, this book was the 52nd most challenged book in schools and libraries from 1990 to 1999, narrowly beating out this other film we've covered this season, which is also based on a book, obviously. Dad, do you have a guess? It's a film you loved, but you had only seen it for the first time.
No, I don't have a guess. I'm drawing a blank.
All right. American Psycho.
Ah.
So that looks like a good spot for our first break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 280th episode, we welcome back Peterson W. Hill of the War Starts at Midnight podcast to discuss Seven from 1995, celebrating its 30th anniversary. Directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, cinematography by Darius Kanji, music by Howard Shore, starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, John C. McGinley, and Kevin Spacey. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Certainly the last time that we had a Kevin Spacey movie on, that didn't apparently go gangbusters and become the #1 downloaded episode of the entire season. I wonder how this one will go.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Anyway, before we get too much further, let's check in with Frank. What's going on with you and where can people find you?
Thank you very much. So I have two podcasts. One of them I do solo, and it's called Reels of Cinema. And you can find that on Apple, Spotify, and other major podcasting platforms. The other podcast is one that I co-host with my friend Dave, who lives out in Liverpool, England. And this podcast is called Movies Across the Pod, also available on Spotify and other platforms. You can find me on Facebook. Feel free to join my public Facebook film group called Reels of Cinema, same title as my solo podcast. I'm on Twitter at FilmBuff1974, Instagram and Threads, both at Frank Mandosa 1974, and I can also be reached via email at reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com.
Well, thank you, Frank, and we appreciate that. Now, turning our attention, as we will be each week, we have the next set of the Cinema Legacy Poll. All right, just a quick recap of where we were last week. We had a tie at 120 with Jackie Brown, King Kong, and Reservoir Dogs, and that's the original King Kong from 1933. We had The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring from 2001 at 119, 118, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 117, High and Low, 116, Train to Busan, 115, Wings, the original Best Picture winner from 1928. Nashville at 114 from 1975, something we covered earlier this season. Arrival from 2016 at 113. 112 was Sherlock Jr., the Buster Keaton film from 1994. And at 111, we had Cabaret from 1972. So tonight, we reveal the next 9 films, I think, approximately here. And I know we're supposed to reveal 10, but I will get to that in a minute, why we're only doing 9 tonight. So at number 110, we have a film we just recently covered this season. That would be The Apartment from 1960, the Billy Wilder classic and Best Picture winner of that year. Then we have another film that we have covered on the show, but I believe it was last season, a film that I introduced to my dad that I was very thankful that he really appreciated when we did it. That is The Third Man from 1949, the Carol Reed directed film. Then at 108, we have Akira Kurosawa's 1985 film Ran. At number 107, we have our third Quentin Tarantino film of the list so far with Inglourious Basterds from 2009. At number 6, we have, ironically, David Fincher's Seven from 1995, which we will be covering next week. At 105, we have Raging Bull. Also ironic that we're covering that later on in the season, and we already talked about it briefly tonight from 1980. At number 104, we have Rebecca from Alfred Hitchcock, the Best Picture winner of 1940. So we have a few different Best Picture winners so far in this list. Number 103, a film that I have not yet seen, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, the French film from 2019. And finally, at number 102, we have Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia from 1999. Now, we are not revealing the 101st film tonight because there is a tie for the 100th place on the list. So next week, we start the top 100 on the Cinema Legacy poll. So, first off, before we get to just initial reactions of what we've covered here tonight, we'll just do a quick rundown. Number 110, The Apartment. Just do a up or down, have you seen it? I have seen it. Dad has obviously seen it. Frank, yes, of course. The Third Man. Everybody's seen it. Ron, I have not seen that one. So none of us have seen Ron, okay? Inglourious Basterds, yes. Obviously, we've covered it a couple of times on the show.
Remember
7.
to do that as one.
Okay, well, this is 1 too. And for anybody that's only on audio, I just flipped the bird. Anyway, if you didn't get that just from pure context, but has everyone seen 7?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Got to have a verbal thing for an audio medium, but Raging Bull.
Yes.
We've all seen that?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Rebecca?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I've seen that as well. Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I have not seen.
I have not.
I have not.
Okay. And Magnolia. We obviously,
Yes.
Dad and I covered it for an episode last fall, but you've also seen that, Frank?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Okay. So none of us have seen Ron or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but it appears everything else we have seen from this list. So initial impressions on The Apartment, The Third Man, Ron, Inglourious Basterds, 7, Raging Bull, Rebecca, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and Magnolia in our release tonight. I believe I have counted 6 different decades represented in the 9 films we unveiled tonight.
Raging Bull, I have as one of Scorsese's better films. I know that may be controversial.
I don't think it is, but it's much more critically a pleasing film than it is necessarily a general audience film, because like there is almost nobody that's going to say, hey, do you want to flip on Raging Bull tonight?
Well, I liked it better than Goodfellas.
Yeah.
That's just me.
It's been a while since I've seen it, so I'll keep an open mind for when we cover it on later this season with the ladies from Movies and Us, but yeah.
Okay.
I covered Raging Bull in one of my first Reels of Cinema episodes. In fact, I had a guest on, Chris of the Cinematic Traveler podcast. I have mixed feelings about Raging Bull. If I had to select a favorite Scorsese film from that era of his career, I personally would go with Taxi Driver. Raging Bull was very skillfully shot and made. Robert De Niro, as he always does, he completely, he blew it out of the water. He was phenomenal.
Tarantino being on the list again is a good thing. I like Inglourious Basterds. I think just the performance from Christoph Waltz by itself merits being in the top 120.
I think those that are more appreciative of his later work, as he kind of gets more into the historical retelling type of stuff, I think that's their film that they think is the more superior. I personally did not have a single Tarantino film on my top 50 which I don't know if we've decided yet how we're going to talk about our own 50 or our list that we submitted for this poll as well.
Yeah.
But as much as I like Tarantino, there's just not one movie of his that I feel really excels to be put among the top 50 films. If we're talking like 100 or 150, then I could definitely see it. But there are not, even as much as I enjoy his films, they just fall a little bit short for me on the X factor of excellence for whatever reason. And I think that's somewhat seen in the fact that we have 3 of his films that fall below the top 100.
Personally, I can't remember if Once Upon a Time in Hollywood made my 50 or if it got cut right towards the end. I know it was right around that 50 mark. So I'd have to look at my list again to know.
If I had to select a favorite Tarantino, it would be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah. I think that's my personal favorite, although I do really enjoy Reservoir Dogs and Inglourious Bastards. It's just, I think that for most people, and I'm probably in the minority in thinking that maybe Inglourious Bastards is possibly his best film, but I think the majority of people, if there's going to be a Tarantino that's up higher on the list, it's likely to be the one everybody's thinking about from 1994.
Yes.
I think there's more consensus around that being his best film, and thus why it may appear higher on this list. But we don't know yet. We haven't gotten there. Call that a tease, folks. So any other reactions yet to the list? We did also have 2 more international films nominated or appear on this list this week. So Kurosawa's Ran, so the second Kurosawa film that has appeared on the list so far, and the French Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
I love international cinema, and I am extremely open to watching both of those films. It's such a treasure trove that too many people don't go digging for.
So that would make 4 different international films so far, joining also the Kurosawa High and Low, as well as Train to Busan, that we already have in our list. So we basically, to this point, have Kurosawa films and then really modern international cinema. 2019's Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Train to Busan from 2016. So other notable things so far in the list that we've seen so far, we have several Best Picture nominees: Arrival, Nashville, Cabaret. We have several Best Picture winners in Wings, as well as The Apartment and Rebecca that we already mentioned. So I think there's a coalescence around a lot of good films, and I'll be curious to see kind of how we get for decades, directors, as well as Best Picture winners that may be further up the list as well, and kind of how the list sorts itself out in that balance between international film and then obviously the more English-speaking American or British films that I think we're much more familiar with. So I think we have a good mix so far. I'm very pleased with how the list has turned out. But yeah, I think that's it for this week. So that's numbers 110 through 102. We'll start next week with the tie at 100. So stay tuned for that. All right, we left off at Best Performance. Dad, who do you have down?
I have Mary Tyler Moore. I think her performance had to be restrained but without being shrill. And so I think she did a very good job. And, the one thing about this is I thought it was such a great performance again after I've seen it this time, that I was surprised that this was not a career-changing moment for her. But I started doing a little bit of research, and I have a feeling I understand why it was not. She ended up in the Betty Ford Center in 1983, and I think she struggled personally, and it kind of stunted whatever momentum this Oscar nomination gave her.
I think it was also going to be difficult for her to completely come out of the roles that she'd been in on TV specifically up until that point. So that might be part of it as well. But certainly, I think any of the four primary actors in this movie, if you nominate them for anything here, I would entertain any argument for their inclusion on any of these awards. I think they're all fantastic for the most part in this film. Personally, I have Judd Hirsch as my best performer, but it's only because I really got into his. It felt like a boxer, or like a true boxer, not one of these brawlers that just is throwing a ton of punches, but the guys who like dance around the ring a little bit and throw really strategic jabs. Anytime he's in one of those therapy scenes, he is very strategically like trying to rope a dope Timothy Hutton into like, come further, give me more, come out of your shell, just kind of coaxing him along, but never completely like going right at him. He's just asking very pointed strategic questions. And I was just really impressed. Maybe it has a little bit to do with the writing, but how well he delivers these things and trying to deal with what I think some people would be challenged by is kind of like this punk kid who's clearly suffering, but the way he just is so defiant at times, in especially the early portion of the film where he's not yet come to accept that this can be really helpful to him. And he's not seeing himself yet. He's not compartmentalizing and organizing and dealing with his trauma, his grief, and all of the other things. And as he slowly begins to process these more, he allows this relationship between them to foster. Because up until the point where it's at the end and he says, "I'm your friend," which I think there could be some ethical dilemmas in that, in a therapist saying, "I'm your friend," and just the closeness of that. But in that moment, that's kind of what you need from a film that's been leading up to that point. That you want somebody with some level of success that's improved and progressed themselves, and they see that reflected in how this relationship is fostered between the two of them. So I have him as my best performance there. I was just really impressed with how he did this performance this time around.
Well, if I had to single out what I think was the best performance, me personally, I go with Timothy Hutton. The first time I saw this film, from the first minute that he was on screen, I was immediately drawn in. He was singing in the choir when they're singing that vocal version of Pachelbel's Canon in D. And as the camera pans across all the students and then it zooms in on him, I knew the premise of the film. I knew that he was a character who had just been released from a mental hospital. There was just some kind of a vulnerability to him that he just very successfully captured. He had bags under his eyes. He looked exhausted. His hair was disheveled, but he was so focused on the singing. And that was, to me, that was commitment to the role, because how many actors would be able to take a moment like that and actually convey all of that through one glance at the songbook, and then glancing back up at the conductor, and then glancing back at the songbook, letting out that final note, that tenor high note, forcefully, or as forcefully as he knew how to. It was a moment of release, I saw it as. I sing, I hit the high note, that's where I'm expounding all of my energy, all of this pent-up energy that he has. And when I say energy, I'm referring to his tension, I'm referring to his anxiety, I'm referring to his need to release all of that mental chaos that he's bottling up inside.
I would say he's the most imperfect performance of the four for me. I know that this might be heresy a little bit because he's the Oscar winner out of the four of them, and I think for the most part his is the career that really took off or really had an extra boost because of this movie and his win. There's a part of me that felt it was a little bit overacting at times. I'm not sure whether it was always called for. Like, it's really hard to act with such passion and emotion, and especially with we're dealing with the context of we're not exploring mental health at that point. I don't know if he had another example to really reflect on that could say this is exactly how somebody with issues of mental health really behaved. And so maybe I'm unfairly judging a performance that was on the peak, on the novel side of doing that. And yet I still have him as my most charismatic because there's an accessibility, a vulnerability that's there that you really plug into. And even though I think some of his performances a little bit overstated at times, there's still something where you jump into his shoes willingly. And I think that's the great part about this film is that you're willing to engage particularly him as a character and understand, sympathize with his situation.
I do recall a lot of awkward moments with him, but I don't know if it was overacting on his part or if it was over directing on Redford's. Like,
And that's possible.
I personally could have done without him singing after Elizabeth McGovern tells him, "You have a beautiful voice," and she hops on the bus, and then he sings out, "Oh, you're just saying that," and then he goes home singing Hallelujah the whole way home. I could have done without that, but that was in the script, so that was Alvin Sargent, and Redford directed him that way. So I don't know really where I don't want to say where the fault lies, but I don't know whose creative decision that was for sure. But I would say the film would lose nothing if that were deleted.
Again, I think that the film is still good in its imperfection. And so it doesn't really lose anything for me. These are just some of the things that I watch with a more critical eye the longer we've done this show, and that I'm looking for more as we kind of start to really pick apart and dissect things in a way that I didn't the first time I watched this, and I was just watching it as a cinephile or somebody who wanted to see all of these movies. But best secondary performance for me, and I know I already gave my most charismatic, but I had Donald Sutherland. I will clear the floor a little bit for my dad to pontificate on the great Donald Sutherland and all of his performances as he did on our MASH episode, and I'm sure he's going to want to do every time that Donald Sutherland comes up, including when we cover Clute next year. But he's good. He's very good in this movie. I think the role reversal and against type for him being I wouldn't say the like tough father, but he's got more range as an actor than I think most people have. Even some like really good actors that are stars. Like I think Donald Sutherland technically has more range to me than even somebody like Jack Nicholson, who had a very specific range. And while he was a very good actor, it was not, to me, I always felt like Jack Nicholson was just different versions of Jack Nicholson. And it's kind of the same thing I feel with like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is on an island by himself. He's, running through the jungles of Vietnam. He's a gay lawyer. It's always Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks is a very good actor, but I don't lose him necessarily in the part in the way that I do occasionally with Donald Sutherland, who I think he's got a character actor's mentality in a leading performance oeuvre.
Oeuvre?
Yes.
Okay.
Body of work. Is that better for you?
I like oeuvre. You can play with your oeuvre all you want.
Yes, I will definitely push my oeuvre all over you.
Yeah.
This is where I have to go against the grain because I see Donald Sutherland as the weak link in the cast. I'm not saying that he delivers a bad performance, but we have Timothy Hutton, who at the time was the fresh face. This was his film debut. I personally think he should have been nominated in the leading category, but there's no way he would have won against De Niro, so that's why they probably put him in the supporting category. Happens all the time.
Most definitely. And also, you could kind of sell that Donald Sutherland was the bigger name, so for him to lead, quote unquote, be the top billing, I think made more sense, but I agree. Most of the movie is from Timothy Hutton's perspective, so I think most people would say it's either a co-lead or he's definitely not supporting.
Well, it's like Brad Pitt in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He went supporting, but was he really secondary to Leo?
I have done this for when we've been on the Revisionist Almanac, that I know that you have an appearance coming up here in a couple of months. But my basic definition, and we've gone back to it often, is, are you in 50% of the film? Is there a scene from your perspective? If both answers are yes, then you are not a supporting character. And I think recently when we did our recording for 1982, I said there were 5 lead actors in the movie Diner from Barry Levinson, because most of them are in a good portion of the film, and almost all of them gets at least one scene from their perspective. Sometimes it happens.
It can be tricky territory. A very slippery slope.
I mean, I would agree with you that Brad Pitt is probably not supporting in, he's definitely not by my own criteria in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, yet I will still defend that Kieran Culkin was a supporting actor last year, because there's no singular scene in that movie that he won for from his perspective at all.
That's fair. That is fair, yeah.
I know I'm in the minority there, but...
Well, it's because you play with your oeuvre.
Oeuvre?
Oeuvre, excuse me. You play with your oeuvre.
Oeuvre.
Play with your oeuvre.
Okay. If I keep playing with my oeuvre, it's going to end up exploding all over you. Anyway. Frank, who is your best secondary performance?
I would have to go with Mary Tyler Moore.
Okay.
She was not an incredibly versatile actress on television, for sure. She was always playing the same type of character, the perky, cheerful, that kind of thing. This was new territory for her. This was a chance for her to say, okay, I am more than just that woman that you saw for 7 years tossing her beret into the sky. She proved that she was one of television's finest comedians, and now she had the chance to do something dramatic. And it was not and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but it was not a television movie. It was a feature film. And this was at a time when, I mean, it's much different now, but this was at a time when television was seen as very inferior to film. You weren't playing in the sandbox with the big kids. You were with the little kids. So television actors versus film actors at the time, it was very difficult to transition. She is one of the few from her time. I mean, since then, we've had Helen Hunt, for example, winning for As Good as It Gets while she was still doing Mad About You. But Mary Tyler Moore, for her to get an Oscar nomination when she was just off of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which came when she was just off of Dick Van Dyke, for her to get that very well-deserved Oscar nomination, that was something. That was something. And I know that I've seen it where people who look back, they say, oh, well, it was a pity nomination because of what happened in real life with her real life son. But the thing of it is that her real life son died after she finished filming the movie. He died when the movie was in theaters. So it was not a matter of, this happens to me, therefore I am going to bring it to this story. I find a personal relevance here. That wasn't it. Not at the time of the filming. I agree. Film roles did not materialize for her. She said that she wished that she had been more aggressive in pursuing film roles. She said that she was always waiting for the telephone to ring. She said the phone was always ringing for the Sallys and the Janes and the Goldies, meaning Sally Field, Jane Fonda, Goldie Hawn. She said, would I have had more film roles had I not been such a strong presence on television? And she said, but this is my deal. This is what I got. She did a film with Dudley Moore called 6 Weeks, which was a flop. She did a film with Christine Laddie and Ted Danson called Just Between Friends, which was a flop. Then she did not do another feature film for another decade, not until 1996's Flirting with Disaster with Ben Stiller and Patricia Arquette. So she never really had a film career to speak of, but this particular role, this particular performance, really was the only film that she was in, the only feature film that she was in, that gave her the chance to do something really different. And she rose to the challenge.
Dad, who is your best secondary performer?
I had Judd Hirsch. I think you could put his performance and stack it up against like the quintessential psychologist or psychiatrist. he was so believable in the part. He played it perfectly. I think that he was held in such high regard by those in the industry because of the way the way the part was written and his performance of it. So I really was impressed by him in this. Then again, I've been impressed by him whenever he's done anything. I mean, he was impressive to me in The Fabelmans, which is his last film.
Most charismatic, I've already given mine. So, Dad, who did you have?
I have Donald Sutherland, and that's simply because he was so affable in this. You could see he would range between tortured and accepting and happy and sad, and he had a wide range of emotions. I think that you were so pulling for him by the end of the movie that you ended up buying into his character as being your tie to the story.
Frank, who did you have?
For most charismatic, I have Dinah Manoff. Dinah Manoff, who plays his friend Karen from the hospital. She appears in only one scene, but it is one hell of a scene. It is impactful because she is coming across as put together. She says, well, I began to see a psychiatrist for a little while, but he just kept telling me the things that I already knew. And finally, I decided that the only person who can help me is myself. At least that's what my dad says. And she's bright and she's cheerful and she's talking about the drama club, the play that they're putting on. And the thing of it is, from the very first moment, you can see that it is all an act, because when he greets her, he's sitting down, she sneaks up behind him, she covers his eyes, he turns around, they both laugh. He stands, he gives her a hug. If you look at her, she blinks several times and looks away. She is not returning the hug. And that was a very subtle blink and you'll miss it acting choice that I always thought was incredible. And then they sit down, they have this conversation. He's feeling self-conscious because he is seeing Dr. Berger, and here she is saying, I'm not seeing anybody right now. And then she says to him, cheer up. Let's have the best year ever. Let's have a great Christmas. And she's basically saying to him, get over yourself. And he feels, I think that he feels that she is not the person that he knew at the hospital. No, they've gone their separate ways and you can't really go back. Obviously, given what eventually happens to her, it is obvious that she was not doing all right. And I just found that appearance by Dinah Manoff very brief, but very splashy.
So you're going to have to suffice with a small rant of mine here for a second. All the people that think you have to have this one particular day of the year because it's Christmas and it's supposed to be peaceful and nice and everybody's getting along and everything else, why should that be any different than any other day of the year? I just do not understand this notion that we all have to have this like really buttoned up Christmas, and like how we are every other day of the year somehow takes a backseat to this one day. Why is this one day supposedly special? Now, Christmas, if you want to get together with your family and you want to treat that as being special because you're with people that you're surrounded by that you care about, but that doesn't mean there can't be conflict. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be ourselves. To me, if you're just trying to put on this air of whatever else, I don't know. I've always been annoyed by that. And it's partially because my mother has always insisted that we have this like lily white Christmas all the time. And she just doesn't accept any. It even goes to the notion that she won't put colored lights on the damn tree.
It's because okay, I don't like the looks of colored lights. So there.
You who complain about all of her earth tone paint colors and whatnot.
I like solid colored lights.
What color do you usually go with? Blue, red?
She varies. We've done cranberry and gold. We've done silver and green and forest green. She changes the colors every period or every couple of years. She's got whole sets of lights and ornaments, and she just changes them out. So I don't know. I don't get involved. It makes her happy, and she flitters around the house and doesn't bother me while I'm watching football. So
Well, that is fair.
she
But
does her decorations, and I come out and periodically go, "Oh, that looks nice," and then go back and watch football again. So, it works
I just
out.
think it looks manufactured and cookie cutter, and it shows no
Whatever.
personality whatsoever.
I don't care. There's just certain things. You just learn when you've been together long enough that there's certain things that you just go.
That's fine. That's why I'm
Have
saying
at
it
it.
on a podcast that she will never listen to, and not necessarily to her face, because it's an unwinnable conversation. Ultimately, it's not my house, and I'm not paying for it. So what does
Well,
it make a difference? But
It's
I'm just
fine.
saying, in general,
I know.
this stuff annoys me just about
I just
family
let
and
her-
whatever else.
Just let her go. I'm just glad she lets me live in her house.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think I'll clip that one out and start spreading it on the social media accounts next year or next week. Okay. Okay, so then wrapping back around, let's move to best scene then. And I said, this is a movie of a lot of subtle moments to me, and some of my scenes are built around that. I think there's a few subtle moments that I couldn't fit into a particular scene, and I'll just kind of like do these as slight honorable mentions. But the few times that Conrad and Beth tried to talk to each other and they just seem to be talking past each other, I think is really clever filmmaking. It's kind of an expressive of a very subtle, they just don't emotionally connect or don't necessarily understand or see each other. There's also a moment near the end of the film where he hugs her, but she just cannot, like, you can see her almost breaking inside, that she just cannot return the affection he's giving her. In that moment, it's like saying, I'm forgiving you and I'm letting go, but she just cannot reciprocate. And I think that's where, to me, even before the scene with Donald Sutherland in the dining room, that you kind of see all of this truly start to disintegrate and fall apart. But here are the scenes that I have nominated overall. I have Trig, which is the conversation between her, and it's another example of this where they're talking past each other, but she goes into the older brother's room and he kind of surprises her, and then they have this kind of nice conversation. Also, why is he proud of a 74 on a test or a quiz? That's not a good grade. That's like a D.
I don't know. Maybe it was out of 80.
Maybe, I guess. Okay. Anyway, then I have the Christmas tree scene where they're decorating the Christmas tree and she comes in and confronts him because she found out from her friend. How dare she find out from her friend that he quit the swim team? No question about, why did you quit the swim team? Are you okay? Nothing else. It's, I was embarrassed. Then I have funeral attire, which I think is a little self-explanatory, but we can expand on that scene a little bit later. I have Karen, which is the moment he finds out that she's died by suicide. I'll borrow Frank's introduced terminology, which I hadn't heard of before tonight. And then he goes to see Dr. Berger after that. I have late night chat, which is supposed to refer to the moment that Donald Sutherland has that monologue with Beth and she starts packing. And then finally, I have Conrad and Calvin, which is the final scene of the film, which in some circles I've heard is controversial because of its slightly open-ended nature. I don't see it that way, personally. But any other scenes that either of you would like to add to those six?
One scene that I always, in a good way, cringed at, because you're supposed to cringe, is when his swim coach is talking to him. And so Conrad is standing in front of him wearing nothing but his bathing suit. And when you don't have too many clothes on, you're vulnerable. This is a kid who is already vulnerable enough. He does not need to be humiliated or degraded. He certainly does not need to be judged any more than he already has been. And the coach was completely not even unsympathetic. The coach was just cruel. He said, "Did they give you shock treatment out there?" And Conrad said, "Yes." And you have the other swimmer, you have one of his swim team members listening in on the conversation. The coach yells at him to get into the water. He does. I personally want to kill the coach, because if the coach is saying to that other kid, "This is none of your business, get into the water," then shouldn't this be a conversation they're having in his office? This should not be a conversation happening right there at the pool. But then he goes on to say, "I'm no doctor, but I would never let them put electricity in my head." And what's Conrad supposed to say to that? This is a kid you're talking to. You don't say that to anybody, let alone a kid.
And I think he actually does himself even more disservice in the scene where Conrad quits the swim team. And his initial reaction is to be like upset that he's like somehow personally violating him. And you're throwing away your life by quitting the fucking swim team. I mean, okay.
That was a bit of a...
I will let Heather Stewart comment on how poor the swim pieces of this movie are and how accurate they are or not. Supposedly this is a school that's in competitions and such, and he must have poor form from what I've been told, but I have no ability to actually comment on that. But it's still the swim team. I wouldn't care if it was the basketball team. Your life does not end because you quit something in high school.
It could, well, not end, but it could be altered significantly if you quit using condoms.
Well, that implies a need for them to start with, but okay.
Didn't see that one coming. Okay.
Well, after he has already talked about my oeuvre enough tonight.
This is true.
Okay, well, moving on. So, out of these 7 then, we'll go with swim coach, Trig, Christmas tree, funeral attire, Karen, late night chat, and Conrad and Kelvin. What is the best scene?
For me, it's late night chat. It's the culmination where they could live these lives in coexistence without having, but once they have to actually draw on emotions and rely on each other, the inability for them to count on her, and especially Kelvin, it was like scales falling from his eyes and everything changed. And it was the disintegration of the relationship and the family.
I don't know if this is the best scene per se, but it's the one that I think on a logical perspective is the most meaningful to me. And that's funeral attire, which I threw it in here because that's somewhat meaningful to me. What the hell difference what does it matter what I'm wearing to my son's funeral? Like, I'm trying to grieve. If I'm going in my own burlap sack or whatever, let me do my grieving in my own process of way. Putting on airs to bury your son, I don't know. There's a part of that from both on a logical and an emotional perspective that just hits me as really meaningful and profound, even as small of a section of the film as it is.
I'm torn between the scene with Karen in the diner and the scene with the coach that I just mentioned. If I had to decide between the two, I would say probably that the more impactful one is Karen.
So we're nominating another one on top of these?
But wasn't that already one in the...
So by the inclusion of Karen that I had, it's more of his finding out her demise and then his conversation with Berger at the end. So if you wanted to nominate that one additionally, then that's another one where you had already mentioned the subtlety in her when you nominated her for most charismatic. Is that the one I'm assuming, or the scene that you're mentioning here?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure. So, all right. So you're nominating the first Karen scene.
The first Karen scene. Yes.
Okay. All right. Favorite scene. I'll just say that my favorite scene is also my most indelible, and it's the ending. Kelvin is so raw and vulnerable in that moment where there's this frayed relationship. And I think it's the first time that both of them truly see each other and are able to start leaning on each other. And that's why that moment where Kelvin expresses his affection for his father, I think is so profound to me in that moment. I know it's a little bit open-ended, but to me, it's a great moment to end on, because Calvin's expressing that he might be a disappointment. His son should not admire him because he's dealing with his own vulnerabilities, his own weaknesses, his imperfections. And his son says, I see past that, and it's okay, because to me, you've always been admirable, even if you weren't necessarily perfect, and I love you anyway. And for him to reach past that, and then I think he has been trying through the entire progression of this movie to connect with his son, because not just because he wanted to know that his son was okay, but he needed his son to also lean on, so that they could lean on each other together. And his son was not there to that point where they could lean on each other. And he finally gets to that point because he's started to deal with his own trauma. So then he can start to maybe help his dad mend. And I find that to be an incredibly impactful way to end the film. So I have that at both my favorite scene and my most indelible. I think it's informative of, in some ways, the relationship I view that I have with my dad, no matter what he says about my oeuvre. Either of your favorite scenes?
For me, I think one of the most indelible scenes is at the very beginning when Beth is preparing breakfast. Of course, all of the silverware is lined up perfectly, the plates, everything is in its proper place. I stole that from the tagline in the poster. Everything is in its proper place except the past. But she is making damn sure that everything is rigidly where it should be. Everything is perfect. She made French toast because it's Conrad's favorite. He comes down the stairs eventually after Cal keeps calling up to him. And when Conrad calls back down, I'll be right there. Take a look at Mary Tyler Moore's face. Because she, like Karen, she has a very subtle moment where she just looks off to the side and you can see her mouth tense up. She looks off to the side because the sound of his voice makes her nervous. He finally comes down the stairs and Cal enthusiastically, probably too enthusiastically, greets him. There he is. And she says, it's French toast. It's your favorite. Conrad says, I'm really not hungry. This for her was probably a very difficult thing to do, to take this step to try to please him. So in her mind, this was probably a grand gesture, and he rejects it. She immediately swipes it off the table and she shoves it into the garbage disposal. Calvin is protesting, he'll eat it, what are you doing? And then her excuse is, you can't save French toast. And then she immediately goes into a list of things that have to get done that day. So she just, every time that she, and it's not often, but every time that she tries to make some sort of connection between them, like the scene when she joins Conrad outside when he's just lounging in the chair, she gets in her own way. She takes it personally. You both said she is a narcissist. If he's not hungry, he's not hungry. She sees it as a personal slap in the face. I made you your French toast, your favorite, and you're rejecting it. When she joins him outside and they have that rare moment of casual conversation, and he is talking about that time that there was a bird that was loose in their garage, and she actually smiles and says, oh yeah, I remember that. And then Conrad makes the grand mistake, and I'm putting mistake in air quotes. He actually has the audacity to mention the name of Buck, the older brother. At the mention of that name, she immediately shuts down, stands up, and fills the awkward silence with all of this nonsense about the neighbor's dog. They talk over each other. He knows that the moment is gone. He literally backs in her face. She turns around and walks off. So actually, I know I just described two scenes, but I would say French toast and outside on the lawn.
For me, my favorite moment, and I was going back and forth, which is Karen and funeral attire. But I think they're one and the same. I think that both are the epiphanies of coming to realize what your problems are, or what the emotional brick is in the in your bag. I mean, what is causing the weight, which is causing the problems in your life. And so I think that both of those, Calvin coming to realize how his emotions are being manipulated or controlled or stunted by his wife, and talking with the doctor, coming to the conclusions and letting it out, and the remorse of survivor's guilt and all of this. So those are my favorite scenes. And I'll go right away to the most indelible. It's the closing, which is all of a sudden now you have these two people who have been freed up by what was, I guess, the equivalent of a weight lifted off of their emotions by their mother no longer being there. And now they have the opportunity to try to reach out and connect with each other emotionally. And you can see it's a new day, it's a dawn, and that's exactly what is happening between the two of them.
So that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOTE podcast and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 251 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Rick Davies, 81, English musician. The band Supertramp, songwriter, Bloody Well Right, and Goodbye Stranger. Stuart Craig, 83, English production designer. Gandhi, Dangerous Liaisons. The English Patient, the entire Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts series, 3-time Oscar winner. Derry Power, 90, Irish actor, Super Gran, Educating Rita, Far and Away. Mark Volman, 78, American musician, co-founded the Turtles, played with Flo and Eddie and the Mothers of Invention. And Stephen Mendio, 84, American actor, Slapshot, Broadcast News, Lone Star.
Thank you, Dad. All right. I have to admit, I only have some very tangential relationship to some of these people. I'm an outspoken critic of the Harry Potter series. I was a fan of the first two movies, and then by the time it moved to the third movie, Prisoner of Azkaban, I was very, very, very far out on the entire series, and I don't think I've watched a single one of them after that point, and I've definitely not watched any of the Fantastic Beasts. But that being said, I know I am publicly on record defending Gandhi as a very good movie. I don't know if it's a great movie necessarily, but I think it's a very good movie. And I think the production design has a lot to do with that. I know that he won his Oscars for Gandhi, Dangerous Liaisons, and The English Patient. So obviously somebody that has a good track record and resume. One might even say oeuvre to comment on. But Rick Davies, like, I didn't grow up with Supertramp. The most notable thing that I can recall is Michael Scott at the end of The Office singing Goodbye Stranger to Toby. So that's like my relationship with that song. But outside of that, I don't have a ton of personal relationship to the people we're recognizing this week, I have to admit.
I was a big Supertramp fan. I considered Breakfast in America to be one of the better albums of the late 70s. And I just loved Supertramp's music at that point in time. So it was kind of sad to see his passing. But I understand. I'm getting to that age where all of my rock stars are starting to pass away.
And so we recognize these here fondly with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Now, as a moment of levity outside of the general recurring joke of oeuvre tonight, I will mention, since it's a big deal normally for you, you were drinking kombucha tonight due to your previous illness and the fact that you had to miss last week from the show. I, however, have switched to the brown liquor because I am celebrating a personal, professional moment today, for what it's worth.
Your win?
My win
Before a
with
difficult
a
judge?
particularly difficult judge, yes,
Yes.
who has been a thorn in my colleagues' particularly side.
I don't have that many problems with her.
Anyway, without revealing too much information, of course, for client confidentiality sake, or who the judge is particularly that I was dealing with today by any stretch, but a personal moment of satisfaction on a week where I was having a little bit of imposter syndrome over law school and other things that were going on. So with
Yes,
that,
I'm hoping to get back to the bourbon sometime this weekend, but
well, this is scotch,
I understand.
which is better than bourbon. Anyway, moving on, let's go to best funniest lines. I will take the one that I began the show with. Calvin, we would have been all right if there hadn't been any mess, but you can't handle mess. You need everything neat and easy.
The first one that I have is Dr. Berger. When he is in a session with Conrad, he asks Conrad a question. I forget offhand what the question was. Conrad's response is, "You're the doctor." And Berger looks at him and says, "First of all, don't say expressions like 'you're the doctor,' because that pisses me off." He was just so... he let Conrad have it. He wasn't going to let him dismiss him.
I think that is one of the genius strokes in both the writing and the performance of that particular character is that he gets personally involved, but also pushes back in certain areas. And that's why I related it to a boxer, that he's just very carefully, methodically jabbing him and wearing him down.
Cal, well, don't admire people too much. They'll disappoint you sometimes.
I have Dr. Berger. Feelings are scary, and sometimes they're painful. And if you can't feel pain, then you're not going to feel anything else either. You know what I'm saying?
Another I had was when he's on his date with Janine, and she comes out and asks him questions about the very moments when he was making an attempt in his life. She sees the scars on his wrist, and she says, "Did it hurt?" And he said, "I don't know. I can't really remember." And she backs off. "You don't want to talk about it." And he says, "No, it's not that." He said, "Other than doctors, you're the first person who's asked." And then she says, "What was it like?" And then he has that monologue where he says, "It's like falling into a hole and it just keeps getting bigger. And then suddenly you're the hole and you're getting swallowed up." And that's when he's cut off by the group of guys coming in singing the 1980 McDonald's jingle and just interrupting and killing the whole moment. But
Yeah.
for Conrad to feel acknowledged like that was nice to see. You're the first person to ask other than the doctors. So obviously he's never had a conversation with his parents about it.
Con, you can't do this. No, it takes too much energy to get mad. Dr. Berger, do you know how much energy it takes to hold it back?
I have Kelvin. He just wants to know that you don't hate him. Beth Jarrett. Hate him? How could I hate him? Mothers don't hate their sons. Is that what he told you? You see how you believe everything he tells you and you can't do the same for me? You can't? God, I don't know what anyone wants from me anymore.
Calvin's saying to Beth, "You're not strong. When Buck died, you buried your love with him, and I just can't understand that. And I don't know if I love you anymore."
Beth, I don't want to see any doctors or counselors. It's me. This is my family. And if we have problems, we will solve these problems in the privacy of our own home, not by running to some kind of specialist every time something goes wrong.
I have Calvin again. Because I've always wondered, in some needling way, what it mattered what I wore. It was crazy that day. We were going to our son's funeral, and you were worried about what I wore on my feet. I'm sure it sounds like nothing to you, but it stuck with me, and I just wanted to tell you about it.
I'm out.
I have one left. Dr. Berger, how long are you going to punish yourself? When are you going to quit? All right, so with that, then we will move to the Stanley Rubric. Legacy is up first. This is a measure of the legacy of the film approximately 5 years after it came out, so 1985 to today. What is the legacy of this film as felt between the industry and the audience? 5 and 5 points apiece for those two groups for a total of 10 in this category. Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go second.
Okay. On an industry perspective, I honestly just don't hear this movie come up that often. I think this is because of its flaws, its imperfections, and again, the way that it's talked in relation to what I think critically is always perceived as the superior film in Raging Bull. I think this film is a little bit more forgotten, and so there are several of us, including the two of us, and I think obviously Frank in this category, that really support and try and promote this film, but as a matter of cause, it's not on any major lists. It hasn't been retired by anything. It doesn't really come up all that much. So from an industry standpoint, I have a 3 just because there are some people that still had some pretty great careers. Like you can stack this in the record of obviously Donald Sutherland as one of his better performances, even though I don't think or recall he was ever nominated for an Oscar, but I think this was the closest he ever came to being nominated for one. Timothy Hutton was a golden boy through the early part of the 80s and the mid 80s and then kind of faded away, but he's not had a bad career. He did a long-standing television show for a while, I think called Leverage. So there are some people that went on to do some stuff. Robert Redford, I think this is like the peak of his directorial work. You might be able to say he had one major other movie that I can recall that he was a director of, and that would be Quiz Show. But outside of that, this is like the peak of him doing anything like that. He obviously has been a solid name in Hollywood as a lead actor for decades. I know he's now retired, but as far as directorial work, you got to kind of admit that. So on an industry perspective, I'm going to say that's a 3. I'm not sure that I'm dead set on that 3, but that's the best I can probably waver on what we have there. On the public side, though, I think that this is a movie that is more supported by a general movie-loving audience, and particularly recently, as I think more people have been introduced to it. The fact that it is a Best Picture winner, I think, has kept it circulating just enough that I would assume there are a significant amount of cinephiles who have probably seen this, and there's just enough name recognition from the people involved, maybe the title of the film, etc., that I'm going to give that a 3.5. So I'm going to say a 6.5 overall, but I don't feel great about it.
I'm going to start with the public, which is, I think you're correct. This is a film that if people have seen it, they tend to like it. I think especially now, I think it was way ahead of its time. I think it lost its grounds because it was not in the mainstream for 20, 25 years. Now people go back and watch it. I think they have new appreciation of it. So I think cinephiles do have a good, strong feeling about it. I'm at a 3 for the public as a result of that. The problem I'm having right now is the industry, and I don't know how far out to go. But I think this film was groundbreaking, and I think it opened the door to psychological issues and matters of counseling, mental health in cinema and in the public.
So let me just open this up. I mean, I feel that, yes, depicting psychotherapy and mental health in film, you could add that to the industry, but with the way that you had talked about it before, that an increase in mental health awareness and therapy as a tool after this movie, wouldn't you say that's more indicative of the public effect and legacy than it is necessarily on the industry, other than the depiction in film?
Yeah, and this is where I was wrestling of where it would be. If that's the case, if you're going to say that that's public and not industry,
Well,
I'm
I
gonna
think
give-
your one caveat could be industry, but I'm saying
Yeah. So if that's the case, then I'm going to adjust it a little, and I'm going to say that I'm going to have a 4 for the industry, and I'm going to go with a 4 for the public.
okay, so you're at an 8 and I have a 6.5. Frank, which camp do you fall in, I guess?
As far as the film industry is concerned, the Hollywood world, I don't like to say this, but I can't help but think that this film is very largely forgotten. There are so many retrospectives in Oscar ceremonies. This film hasn't even been registered as culturally or historically significant. It's not in the Library of Congress registry of films. So with the industry, I'm going to have to go with a 3. Even Timothy Hutton's Oscar win is never talked about. Timothy Hutton is never talked about. Most people, when they think ordinary people, they either think of, I think they think of probably Mary Tyler Moore, because she was the big draw. She was the only leading nominee of the cast. As far as I honestly think that the people who still watch or still talk about ordinary people, probably cinephiles like ourselves, whether they're podcasters or whether they're bloggers or whoever they may be, people like that, Academy Award completionists, people who like to see all the Best Picture winners, and honestly, Mary Tyler Moore's fan base, especially in the past several years since she passed away. So I don't see the public really talking much about this film either. It is, as we've said, the film that stole, quote unquote, the Best Picture Oscar from Raging Bull. People still have not forgiven it for Raging Bull losing to it. So I would have to go with a 3 there, which brings it to a 6.
So that's a 6.83 average between the three of us. Let's move to impact and significance. This is a measurement of basically the same thing as legacy, but rather the impact and significance in the initial 5 years after its release. So roughly 1980 to 1985. What is the impact and significance of this film as split between the industry and the audience, 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. Since I started the last one, Dad, would you like to lead here?
Sure. It did win Best Picture. It got a nomination for Mary Tyler Moore. It got one for Timothy Hutton. It did not really advance Mary Tyler Moore's career. It kind of did a little bit for Timothy Hutton, or at least on a very short trajectory. So I'm going to give the industry a 4.5. The public, it was the 11th ranked film in box office. So I can't give it anything higher than about a 4 for the public. I think it was profitable, but I don't think it resonated with the public as much as other films were. Obviously, you can tell which was number 1.
The Empire Strikes Back.
Which was number 2.
Superman 2?
Oh, think typewriter in the opening scene.
Typewriter.
Working 9 to 5. What a way to make a living.
I was going to say it was definitely not The Shining.
Nope.
Which actually didn't finish as badly as I thought it might have.
At number 3 was a film that's completely forgotten, but it had a very interesting duo. Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder and
Richard Pryor.
Okay.
So these films outdrew it considerably, almost 2-1. So I'm going with a 4. So I'm at a 8.5 overall.
I think that Ordinary People did strike gold, but it was a very it's the quintessential example of 15 minutes of fame. It had its time in the spotlight. It was showered with nominations and wins, cleaned up at the Oscars, nabbed Best Picture, hailed as an auspicious directing debut for Robert Redford, who got Best Director. Timothy Hutton was predicted to become the next big thing. And Mary Tyler Moore. Was this going to begin a new chapter of her career? And too many of those things just didn't happen. It looked promising for a while. Timothy Hutton, if we're going to be talking about impact and significance, according to his IMDb credits, the following year, I can't tell if it was a television documentary or what exactly it was, but he was a narrator for a program called Teenage Suicide, Don't Try It, which is a title that I'm not particularly comfortable with, but it was 1981 and sensibilities were different. My point is that it was, I don't want to say it was a flash in the pan, because I think it was a little bit more than that, but it had its moment, and then people were ready to move on to the next flavor of the month. And this was right before home video was really ubiquitous all throughout the country. VCRs, and so it wasn't, by the time people were renting films, Ordinary People was old news. So I would have to give it a total of probably, I would have to go halfway. I have to give it a 5.
I think I fall much more in Dad's camp than yours, Frank, on this one. It's hard for me, based on the way we've scored, particularly like successful Oscar films, to say that it doesn't have an industry impact. I think that even though Mary Tyler Moore does not necessarily go on to anything more significant, and her film roles kind of dried up, and frankly, this was probably the peak end of her career as far as major acting roles and such. Suppose you could also say, in addition to making the point earlier that Robert Redford, this is probably the peak of his directorial career. I mean, this is his premier Oscar win. Like, he never won one for acting. And I think he's probably more proud of the fact that he did get a directorial Oscar as opposed to an acting Oscar, because of kind of how he views and holds himself. Obviously, I would have to ask him directly that if it's more meaningful for him to have a directorial than an acting Oscar, but, you know, that's maybe my impression a little bit. You could also say that this is the end of Donald Sutherland's like leading man career, because I don't think he had, maybe past the next few years, a whole lot of like leading man parts once you got out of the early 80s. At that point, he kind of just became a character actor where he's the villain in Backdraft, or he's that one scene in JFK, or he's playing, I think it's like the Chancellor in the Hunger Games movies, or, you know, he pops up in all these places, but it's as a character actor at that point. And so he transitions and does something different with his career. You could say that the impact for anyone coming out of this film that is like promoted or does something else is Timothy Hutton, where he was the it guy that everybody wanted in their movie for a couple of years then after this film, based off of his Oscar win. But that also fizzled out at a certain point too. So I'm a little bit conflicted. I think the movie had juice in the moment, and the people immediately coming out of this, like, I don't think it was detrimental for Mary Tyler Moore to have been in this. I don't think it was detrimental for Robert Redford or Timothy Hutton to have won Oscars for this movie, or Elvin Sargent for that matter. I think this movie suffers more in its legacy than it did in its initial impact, where I think you can separate out a little bit that there is a public impact. Again, going back to our conversation of how it started to foster more mental health awareness and some other things that are combined for that. So with the fact that it won 4 Oscars, beat out a more critically, I guess, celebrated movie, and was at least widely celebrated by critics at the time, enough to promote it past something like Raging Bull. I think there is enough here, because like Raging Bull was in the 20s for its like overall finish at box office for the year. It was much more of a propelled critical movie than it was necessarily a popular movie. And we were about to get into this notion. We were coming off the year prior where Kramer versus Kramer, a family drama, was the #1 movie of the year. So it's not like the Oscars was not giving popular movies yet until we got to something like Gandhi and Out of Africa and some of these other movies, The Last Emperor during the 80s, where there was a separation truly between what was the #1 film at the box office and what was critically acclaimed. But Even so, I'm going to go for an 8 on this. So that is a 7.17 between the three of us. Gotta love those decimal points. Let's go to novelty then. This is a conversation basically in 2 parts as of this season. One for 5 points on originality and the other for 5 points on execution for a total of 10. The originality can be about anything having to do with the movie, but usually tends to be about the subject matter or about the context of the time and the themes of the movie. I think this is an audacious movie based on the context of the time to put psychotherapy, family drama, significant grief in an affluent family, and the gender role reversals of the parents right front and center. Is it the most novel thing I've seen in movies? No, but I think based on the context, I'm going to give that a 4. And I think this is even though I don't think it's a perfect film, I think it's still very well executed. There are maybe some cinematography things that I think could have been done a little bit better, but the acting, the writing, to me, really shine in this movie. So I'm going to also give that for a 4, so an 8 overall.
This was a brave movie. It dared to tackle issues that were not really depicted in film before. Again, because it's the perspective of an adolescent. It was based on a book, so it was based on pre-existing material. People had read the book for sure because it was a New York Times bestseller. So the studio and Redford and none of them can claim credit for creating these characters, creating the story. They can certainly take credit for the adaptation, for Alvin Satin's adaptation. So if I'm going to put the uncharted territory that the film addresses, if I'm going to put that into the category of novelty, something that audiences were not used to seeing, I'll give it an 8.
All right, so 2 8s on the board, Dad.
Originality. This is a complete unicorn at the time. There was nothing like this before, and not anything like it for a while after. So I have to give it a 5 for originality. And I think the execution, you had it about right, is a 4. So I'm going to go with a 4, but I'm at a 9.
So that's an 8.33 between the three of us. Let's move to classicness. This is a measure of basically how well the film has aged or not. Was it ahead of its time? Were there themes that it was discussing that were in advance of where culture was in the context of the moment that it was made? I think some of the things that we've talked about are probably ripe for this category. Is it somewhat timeless? Dad, this has a lot of nuance, and you seem to revel in that in this particular category, so I'm going to let you lead.
I've been waffling back and forth on this, on classicness, but it's not, starting out at our 6, but I mean, it is, if this were released today, it probably has as much poignancy as it did back, 50 or 45 years ago?
45, yeah.
So I'm between a 9.5 and a 10. I mean, I cannot say, my gut says to give it a 10, even though I have a hard time giving 10s to classicness, and I tend to reserve that for exceptional films. But this is so far ahead of where it was, and having grown up in that time frame and know what mental health treatment was like and how people looked at it, the fact that this thing came out and brought this into the public eye was way ahead of its time. I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm either a 9.5 or a 10. You guys convince me which of the two is the ones that are, where I should be. Am I right or wrong? Should I be higher or lower?
Do we need to wait for you to flip a coin?
Nope. Go ahead. You convince me one way or the other.
I think that subject material wise and timelessness, I'd probably add a +3 from our normal baseline starting point of a 6. I think it does discuss a lot of issues that are very prevalent, and especially with the higher rate of teen suicide that we're seeing now, there's a poignancy that still rings true. My issues with the film are that, one, there might be some pushback on the Berger character, now more refined in a modern sense. I think at the time he represented somebody that was probably somebody handling the correct situation with a patient, but I think there are some ethical mores that may rise out of a therapist becoming a friend a little bit. I mean, I know that it somewhat does happen because they're there to help spur you along and kind of create this natural bond to see you progress with yourself, basically, that you're making improvements on who you are as a human being. But at the same time, there's a closeness at the end that I don't know how well that would go over in a modern sense. I also think that the way they discuss suicide, mental health, there are just some really outdated portions of things. And if you remember that it's the context of when it was made, it makes sense. But let's go back to Emmett Walsh and the swimming coaches. Frank pointed out, there's just the way they discuss things just seems really outdated. And there's also a way, even when they talk about it with their friends at dinner parties, that just doesn't feel modern. And I think it's fine if you remember it in the context of 1980, but I don't think, therefore, I can give it a full 10. Ultimately, I'm going to take off, just bring it back a little bit, and I'm going to say that this is an 8 because it's ahead of its time. But I think by being ahead of its time, it's maybe 10 years ahead of its time, but not necessarily like 45 years ahead of its time, if you understand what I mean there. So I'm at an 8.
Again, I don't think that this is a film that it's a film that not enough people talk about. Yes, I agree. There's a lot of it that's dated. It was 1980 after all, but there was a lot of it that was dated. Some dialogue was dated. I will say that the themes of the story are timeless. I don't think that that's something, I don't think that conflicts in families and underlying problems and relationships that are never fully addressed, whether we're talking between a married couple or whether we're talking between a daughter and her father, when there is tension, when there are unspoken frustrations and unspoken hurts, and they just fester in your mind, you're going to shut down eventually. So the theme of troubled family dynamic is something that it doesn't matter if it's 1980, 2025, or 1900. This is something that is just relatable for everybody. So in that sense, I would give that an 8.
So does that give you a better baseline for where you want to go, Dad?
I'll tell you right now. I mean, Emmett Walsh's character is supposed to be the general public.
Oh, I know.
And I think a large portion of the general public still has maybe not so blunt a terminology in dealing with mental health, but I think it still exists among a significant portion of the public, and the family dynamics still. So I will go with a 9.5 based on your comments, but I'm going to stick to my 9.5 because I really believe this film has a lot of classical elements that deserve that level of mark.
So that's an 8.5 average between the three of us. For rewatchability, this is usually a subjective category, which is why I've tried to stray into the more objective version of this category as we originally conceived it going back to season 1, and tried to give a more rounded opinion on how the general audience might view rewatchability on this movie as opposed to my personal feelings. Personally, I think this is a much more rewatchable film. It's not a feel-good film that you're going to put on a random Saturday. It's not that kind of thing. But it is a film that I think you can find appreciation for every few years to return to, that's in a cycle that I think, do I learn something new necessarily from each time I watch it. I don't know if it's necessarily that film, but is it something I connect with every time that I turn it on and feel like I can relate to the characters? Yes. And so from that standpoint, on a personal level, I would have it higher than what I think the general public would be here. However, a mental health movie about a kid who has attempted suicide, a family drama where the mother is cold and the father is vulnerable, from the early 80s. Like, if this was in black and white, I think you'd have a difficult time getting anybody to watch this if it weren't also a Best Picture winner. So from that standpoint, I'm going to go with the unfortunate 4.5.
Ooh, wow.
I know. Again, my personal feelings would have this closer to like a 6.5 or a 7, but taking that into account, I think this would be a very difficult sell if you're saying on a random Saturday afternoon, hey, the Badgers just lost. Let's drown our sorrows by watching Ordinary People.
Well, you could watch it and it'd be like the Jerry Springer effect. At least my life isn't that bad.
I don't know what can really be said about the rewatchability factor of this film because it is so dark, it is so heavy, and it's not a feel-good film. It ends on a bittersweet note. I wouldn't even call it an optimistic note. So it's not like by the final frame you walk away feeling good about everything that just transpired. I don't know.
I do actually a little bit feel a little bit hopeful at the end of that they've found this strength within each other and are able to lean on each other finally. I don't know, maybe that's the glass half full in me that's rarely there, but I am a little bit hopeful and optimistic by the end of this movie. Again, maybe I'm in the minority on that. Maybe it's just my oeuvre.
I mean, we can talk more about this when we get to the question about whether or not Beth comes back, but this is not the kind of movie that a group of friends will sit down and watch on a Saturday night when they're getting together. This is not the kind of movie that would be first choice if people were looking to sit down and watch a quote-unquote intellectual film. I think this film is extremely intelligent. I think Roger Ebert said it best when he said that Ordinary People is an intelligent, perceptive, and deeply moving film. And I agree with that, all of those things. But I just don't know how rewatchable it is because it's so heavy. I think there's so much value in seeing it. And I think there's value in rewatching it once, twice at the most. Do I see myself ever really watching this film again? I don't teach the book anymore. I just don't know. I think that it can be a trigger for some people. So I think that some people would avoid watching it for their own personal reasons. I would have to give the rewatchability factor a 3.
All right, so we have a 4.5 and a 3 on the board.
I'm going to be honest. Every time I watch this film, it's cathartic for me because it helps me to heal and understand a lot of the dynamics of my childhood of being the son of an alcoholic. Every time I watch it, I get better understanding and more appreciation and forgiveness for the circumstances. And so I need to watch this film, and I admit I need to watch this film every couple of years. So to that extent, I will go with a 6 because I need to have that in my life, I think, because it gives me appreciation for, understanding what it was and knowing that my parents did the best they could given their backgrounds and circumstances. And so to that extent, I would give it a 6.
Okay. So that is a 4.5 average between the three of us. Then moving to audience score on this one, we had a 76% for Google users and an 88% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.2. So to repeat the categories, we had a 6.83 for legacy, a 7.17 for impact and significance, an 8.33 for novelty, an 8.5 for classicness, a 4.5 for rewatchability, and an 8.2 for audience score, giving us a final total of 43.53, and currently placing it on our list between The Philadelphia Story and My Fair Lady for number 176 on our list. So, another Best Picture winner in there, and I guess an old classic, if you will, but still above a couple of other ones that I think we've had on here that I think this is okay placement. Given that it's not like a highly celebrated film, I think this is something more that lives with certain people and they really help promote it, but it's not like an industry favorite. And really, if it weren't a Best Picture winner, I wonder if it would have truly been forgotten. So, as always, if you disagree with anything that we had to say on this, disagree with any of our scoring, think we're completely right, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of our socials at GMOTPodcast, or you can write us at ronnieduncanstudios.com/GMOTPodcast. All right, now we will move to remaining questions. I had a few here, but we also had some listener questions, so I will get to those in a second. My first one, does Beth ever come back, and do Conrad or Calvin need her to come back?
No and no. I can't see her coming back because her leaving is an admission of failure. And to come back would be reliving that failure over and over and over.
I think it depends on what your definition of coming back is. I think that there's a clear separation and a divorce that will happen. And since she's going to Houston, I think she's going to try and separate herself even from her social group and try and recreate whatever she needs that's neat and tidy. That being said, I do think she will have some kind of relationship with Conrad, whatever that may be, but it's always going to be on her terms, and I don't think it's going to be particularly close.
She's not coming back. No. She's too proud. She's too proud. She does not want to go crawling back to Cal and beg him to take her back. I just don't see that in her nature. I don't see her coming to terms with everything that has been bottled up because she refuses therapy. So she obviously has not been doing well without therapy. If she continues to refuse it, it's just going to be the same cycle of thought for her over and over and over again. Now, that being said, Calvin and Conrad, are they better off without her? I think Calvin said what he needed to say. And I think that for him, ending the marriage was the right thing to do. So for Calvin, no, I don't think he needs her. I think that he has allowed himself to grow and to evolve and to change and to learn more about himself and about his son. He's not going to want to go back to Beth's myopic, the little bubble that she is desperately trying to convince herself and all of them, this little bubble that she hopes really exists. As far as Conrad goes, does he need her? Yes and no. He might at some point later on in life feel the need for catharsis to tell her, sit her down and talk with her and say to her, basically to air his grievances. So do I see that happening? Potentially. So in that sense, I think that he would still need her in order to be able to close the door. Not necessarily lock it, but to close it. The two of them, Calvin and Conrad, living together alone, I think that for the time being, that's what's best for both of them. To lean on each other, to rely on each other.
Does Calvin transfer to another school, or do he and Calvin move?
Well, I can tell you what happens in the book.
Isn't he a senior?
He is repeating his junior year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he was taking his junior classes over because whenever he must have attempted suicide must have been in part of the middle of the school year, and so he must not have finished certain things. I think his classmates were all seniors, but given the conversation he has with, and I can't remember the best friend's name, but
Lazenby.
the fact that he needs to separate, like, I just don't know if there's much of a support system there. I don't think they move, but I could definitely see him going to a different school. So does the book disclose what happens there?
In the book, Calvin sells the house and they move. They stay in the area, but they do move. They downsize. And Conrad tacks on an extra semester of high school. So he graduates in January.
Okay. And that's honestly because he has that relationship with Dr. Berger and he's not like well enough yet to probably graduate from therapy, more or less. I would say it doesn't make sense for him to completely leave the area because of that relationship and maintaining that therapeutic relationship. But also there's issues in the house yet from all the ghosts of the past and everything else that's there. So that makes a little bit of sense. They don't need that much space anymore, and they don't need to keep up that level of socialite like errors that is part of it. So that also makes sense. I don't know. There's a part of me that you need to move away from some level of your repeat trauma so that you can live without having it reoccur for you regularly. And they were never going to completely escape that while they were in the same settings, circumstances, essentially. Okay, any other remaining questions for either of you before we get to our listener questions? Okay, so we have a couple of questions here from some listeners. Heather Stewart, the question queen. What do you think is Donald Sutherland's Mount Rushmore?
MASH.
Yeah, MASH has probably got to be on there. I think Animal House.
Animal House? He's in it for like 10 seconds.
No, he's in it for 2 scenes.
One of them just
fine.
Going into the cupboard and taking out a box of cereal and showing his bare ass. Ooh.
Okay. So what else do you propose? I mean, I don't have nearly the breadth of Donald Sutherland. Like, I think this movie's probably got to be on it. I would agree MASH is probably going to be on it. I haven't seen Clute yet, so
I have, but it's been a long time, but I would say yes.
Clute is a good one. And I would also add Don't Look Now.
I think a lot of people would probably nominate Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Possibly.
Well, that's a GIF, a very widely used GIF when he's pointing with his mouth opening in astonishment and horror as the camera zooms in on him.
All right.
That helps its visibility is what I'm saying, the film's visibility.
Sure. All right. Next question from Heather Stewart, or excuse me, Heather Stewart, just so I can rib her with that. What are the best actors turned directors?
So best as a director, like a successful director?
Ron Howard.
I think the implication here is that it's like leading or star actors turned directors. So that would kind of eliminate Ron Howard from that list. I mean,
Rob Reiner
kind of was a lead per se. Rob Reiner never really, like, he was on TV, but he was never a huge actor per se. Like Clint Eastwood is the one that immediately comes to mind.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other major stars though that like
Stallone's directing has been abysmal.
Well, and even though I thought it started decently, Clooney's directing has not been particularly good.
No.
I'd say Penny Marshall. I mean, she was the lead. She was Laverne, and she was the first woman to make a film that grossed over $100 million at the box office, which was 1988's Big with Tom Hanks. She had a good run. She did Awakenings with De Niro and Robin Williams. She did A League of Their Own with Madonna and Gina Davis and Rosie O'Donnell. She did the remake of The Preacher's Wife with Denzel Washington. I'd say she had a pretty good run as a director.
Greta Gerwig,
Academy Award nominated for directing. Academy Award winning for writing? No, she did not win for writing, but she was nominated.
No, and I don't think she's even won screenplay, which is like what they often hand out anymore for like the second tier directorial award ending, basically, at this point. Trying to, like,
Tom Hanks did Quiz Show, and I can't remember.
No, he didn't. He's only done one movie that I know of that he's
The Thing You Do.
Yes, which we're covering next year.
Excuse me, I misspoke.
Yeah, Quiz Show is Robert Redford.
Yeah.
I did like Bradley Cooper directing his version of A Star Is Born. I wasn't as impressed with Maestro, but I would say the jury's still out on that one. But that could also roughly be in the same vein of somebody who was kind of a lead moving into the director's chair and having a shot.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I'm not really sure. Like, Orson Welles, does that count? I mean, he leads Citizen Kane. He's a significant part of The Third Man. He is kind of an actor, but he also directs. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm very conflicted, and everybody on this show knows my relationship with Orson Welles is spotted at best. But could you put that one in there?
Yeah.
I suppose you could.
So,
What
all
do you
right.
think about Ben Affleck? I mean, he did Argo, which was really good.
He's got, I think, what most people consider like 3 really good directed films in Argo, The Town, and Gone Baby Gone.
The Town and Gone Baby Gone. I was going to mention those. Yes.
Outside of that, he kind of floundered after he got Batman, and he's kind of, I don't know. It's hard to really say that 3 films makes you, because after, I can never understand if it's Live by Night or Live by Night. I think it's Live by Night, but anyway, after that flopped, he hasn't seemed to really go back to it all that much. I'm not even sure the last couple of movies that he's had, did he direct Air, or was he just in it?
I think he directed it.
Okay, so that would be, I think that's an above average film, but it's still one where I'm like, is he at the top of his game, like as a true auteur type of thing? There's a part of me that questions at times even that with Clint's movies. Like, Clint has some very good directorial movies. That is undeniable. But there are other ones where you're like, well, okay.
Well, Costner won a Best Director.
I suppose. I mean, but I think we're grasping a little bit at straws now. If we're crawling that far down the barrel, because, like, what other good movie has Kevin Costner directed?
What other good movie has Kevin Costner been in?
Oh, that is a little bit more wide open. Field of Dreams, Bull Durham.
Okay. In the last 20 years.
Well, that's a different matter.
Yeah. Anyway, I think Clint's by far the out ahead.
Yeah, just by depth, quality, and awards, I would assume that's probably the top. And then after that, I think I probably already have to put Gerwig in there. Just, I mean, based on her impressive resume so far to this point.
Yeah.
All right, we have one last question from Heather Stewart, which we've kind of already answered, but the ending is considered unsatisfactory to many. What is your take? I think we've kind of generally done that, but we're all basically supportive of that being a very good scene and a very good ending, satisfying for us, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So then we'll move into our other question that we have here from Kieran B. over the BPC Best Picture cast. How does Mary Tyler Moore's performance stack up against some of the other leading female performances you have covered? Now, Frank, I would guess that you have not been here, or you haven't listened to a ton of our show, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, there's a lot of content out there, and I know you're working on your own stuff, so you may not have the categorical knowledge that my dad and I do of all of our, I guess it's now 280 episodes, 279 is this one. But the problem that I guess I have is there are several big periods of time where there are not a lot of great written female parts. So where does she stack up with somebody like, we haven't even covered somebody like All About Eve yet, or really anything with Bette Davis. And we've only covered very sparse Katharine Hepburn roles. it's really hard for me to compare Mary Tyler Moore in this film to like Gloria Swanson from 2 weeks ago. I think they're roughly in the same ballpark, but I think they're accomplishing different things. So, and as I've said many times on the show, I am not a good judge of what acting is or is not. So it's really hard for me to be able to say definitively, like, is this one of the best single performances? She didn't win the Oscar that year. So I don't know. Dad, do you have any others that you'd like to throw out that are some seminal leading female performances that we can even highlight?
Well, I mean, you've got Katharine Hepburn and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But it's difficult, off the top of my head to go back over the 200 and how many shows and think about each one of the female categories without having the list in front of me and kind of giving it. If I had, my gut says it's probably an upper third as far as female leads. But more than that, I'd have a difficult time.
I'll throw out a few in here. We've got like Grace Kelly for Dial M for Murder and Rear Window. You could throw out Julia Roberts for Pretty Woman. You could throw out Sandra Bullock for Gravity in here, or Julia Roberts for Erin Brockovich. So I guess the more modern films that we've done, there are some more female-led performances, as you just kind of creep up the list.
Again, I would say it's probably in the upper third at least. I mean, was impressed with the performance.
I mean, another one I'll highlight, ScarJo in Lost in Translation, I would say is roughly in this ballpark for me.
Possibly, yeah.
So but again, it comes to base a lot of the conversation over what you deem lead versus supporting, and then wherever you draw that line, like who's included in the club and how do you pick through all of those. Audrey Hepburn for Roman Holiday.
Yeah.
Do you put Donna Reed in leading for It's a Wonderful Life? I don't think I would.
Yes, I would.
I think based on my qualifications, I don't think there's ever a scene from her perspective in the movie.
Oh, yeah. The scene in the parlor where they end up.
That's not from her perspective, though. So another one that might be a little bit on the line, but how about somebody like Margot Robbie in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? I don't know if she's in 50% of the film.
She's not.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would also qualify. Throwing out somebody like Sigourney Weaver in Alien and Aliens.
Yeah.
Also different performances.
Yeah.
So it's really tough for me to say. I mean, boy,
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, you'd almost have to do a like for like kind of situation to really compare, I would guess. So sorry if that defeats your question, Kieran. I mean, it's a legitimate question. I'm struggling that it may be a little bit too broad to be able to properly answer it without a lot of additional research. So, all right. So if there are no other further questions, I'd like to thank Frank for being back with us again for his third appearance on the show. You are certainly welcome back anytime, my friend. Again, also thank you personally for submitting to the Cinema Legacy poll. We are glad to have you on that as well. And I don't believe we have you scheduled for anything for next year quite yet, but certainly, like I said, you're welcome back anytime. But just remind everybody again what you're working on and where they can find you.
Well, thank you again so much for inviting me back on. I always have a great time talking with the both of you. And if there ever is an opening in the future, then please just reach out and I will be there in a New York minute. As far as my content is concerned, Reels of Cinema, you can find on most major podcasting platforms. That's my solo podcast, Reels of Cinema. And then we have Movies Across the Pod, the one that I co-host. I can be found on Facebook at the Reels of Cinema Facebook group. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Frank Mandosa 1974, Twitter at FilmBuff1974, and email at reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com.
Excellent. So, any remaining thoughts for the week, Dad?
No.
Okay. I will say that just quickly, because I know we're running long on this particular episode, but the Office spin-off, The Paper, is very similar to an idea I had for kind of a somewhat similar project like 5 years ago, but never actually did anything with. So this isn't to allege that I had the idea first or, anything stupid like that. But this is a world that I thought was at least interesting enough to have the idea and start to pursue or look into maybe doing some research for before I just never pursued the idea during the middle of the pandemic when I was doing some spec scripts writing on my own. I did end up writing one pilot during the pandemic. Never really got to a second one or a second episode, but just something that I was kicking around because I wanted to say that I had written one. I don't think it's very good, but it's at least there. That being said, my remaining thought here is just I thought it was actually a very good series. All 10 episodes right now are available on Peacock. I don't know if they're ever actually on NBC linear TV, but if you have or bother to subscribe to Peacock or pay for the $5, whether it's for Premier League football access or I don't know, because you want to watch an NFL game occasionally, because apparently that there will be NFL games specifically designed to only be on Peacock behind the pay service wall, or I don't know, I guess the NBA is also going to be on Peacock, so maybe there will be more subscribers now that they've paid for additional content. But if you have it and you have the opportunity, I think it is at least in the same vein as The Office. It is a little clunky to start with in the first episode, as they're kind of like directly taking you behind the scenes to show how it is generally related to the original series. But that being said, it creates its own characters for the most part. There is one overlapping character, obviously, if you've seen any of the trailers. And I think it's got some very good characters. It does some good work of establishing some people that you want to follow and invest in. And for me, with television, I'm always trying to invest in characters because you're spending so much time with these people. You just want them to be people that you feel like you're worth spending 7-8 hours with at a time. And for me, this was worth the 5 hours or whatever it was for watching it. So I would recommend people go and check that out. But that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part. Next week, for our 280th episode, we welcome back Peterson W. Hill of the War Starts at Midnight podcast to discuss Seven from 1995, celebrating its 30th anniversary. Directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, cinematography by Darius Kanji, music by Howard Shore, starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, John C. McGinley, and Kevin Spacey. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, or TikTok at the handle @GMODPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.